2 patrol cars pulled into my driveway while I was in the middle of unloading groceries, responding to a call reporting a suspected unauthorized entry and possible break-in at my own cabin. A call that, once the responding officers actually checked my ID against the property deed I keep in my glove compartment specifically for exactly this kind of situation, turned out to have been placed by our HOA board president, who had apparently decided, entirely on her own authority, that she was entitled to a spare key to my property, and had called the police the moment she discovered I'd changed the locks specifically to prevent that. My name is Farrick Delacroix Conquo. I own a small cabin in Pinecrest Hollow, a rustic mountain community of about 140 properties, most of them, like mine, used as seasonal or weekend retreats rather than full-time residences, an arrangement that had, for the 6 years I'd owned my place, functioned without any real friction at all. Since most owners simply came and went on their own schedules without much need for close coordination with the HOA, beyond routine dues payments and occasional community maintenance notices. I want to walk you through how this situation began, because it started nearly a year before the police showed up in my driveway, with a policy change our HOA board, under a president named Priscilla Vandermeer Ashcombe, introduced regarding what she described as emergency access protocols. The policy, as originally announced, required all cabin owners to provide the HOA management office with a spare key, ostensibly to allow emergency responders or maintenance crews access in situations involving fire, flooding, or other genuine emergencies affecting an owner's property while they were away. Given how remote and seasonally unoccupied many of these cabins genuinely were for significant stretches of the year. I want to tell you that I did not initially object to the underlying concept, understanding the genuine practical logic behind wanting some emergency access mechanism for a community of largely unoccupied seasonal properties. What I objected to, once I actually read the full policy details, was the specific implementation, which required keys to be held not by any licensed, bonded property management service or local fire department, standard practices I would have found entirely reasonable, but by the HOA management office itself, accessible, per the policy's own language, to designated board members for purposes including routine compliance verification, a phrase considerably broader and more concerning than genuine emergency access. I want to walk you through the correspondence I had with Priscilla directly once I raised this concern, because her responses revealed, over several exchanges, an expectation of access considerably more expansive than any genuine emergency protocol would require. When I asked specifically what routine compliance verification entailed, and why board members specifically, rather than professional emergency responders, needed direct key access, her answer was that the board wanted the ability to periodically confirm cabins were being maintained to community standards, particularly during off-season months when owners are not present to observe conditions themselves. I want to sit with that explanation for a moment, because what Priscilla was describing was not emergency access at all. She was describing a policy that would allow board members to enter privately owned cabins at their own discretion, without the owner's knowledge or presence, specifically to conduct inspections, an authority that struck me, even in that first exchange, as a significant overreach well beyond anything a genuine emergency access protocol would reasonably require. I declined to provide a spare key under those terms, submitting instead a written proposal, which I circulated to the full board, suggesting the emergency access policy be restructured to hold keys with our local volunteer fire department instead, a solution that would fully address the genuine safety concern while removing the considerably more troubling routine inspection authority Priscilla's version had included. I received no formal response to that proposal for several months, during which time, I want to be honest, I mostly assumed the entire policy had simply quietly stalled, since I heard nothing further about it and continued using my cabin normally throughout that period. I want to walk you through the specific incident that led to the police being called. Because it happened on a weekend, I'd arrived to find clear evidence that someone had, in fact, entered my cabin during a period when I hadn't been present. Drawers left slightly ajar that I distinctly remembered closing properly. A chair moved from where I always left it. Small details that, individually, might have seemed like nothing. But that together left me genuinely unsettled about whether someone had actually been inside my property without my knowledge or permission. I called a locksmith the following week and had every lock on my cabin changed, a decision I made purely as a security precaution given what I'd noticed, without initially connecting it to the earlier spare key policy dispute at all. It was only when Priscilla showed up at my cabin about 2 weeks later, apparently attempting to use what she still believed was a valid spare key from an earlier, informal arrangement with a previous owner that had somehow never been properly updated in the HOA's own records, that I began to understand what had actually happened. I want to walk you through that confrontation, because it happened, unfortunately, while I was not present, based entirely on what my neighbor, a retired postal worker named Rosalind Echtterberg Ferreira, witnessed and later described to me in detail. Priscilla, finding her key no longer worked, apparently became convinced that this indicated some kind of unauthorized break-in had occurred at my property, and rather than simply calling me directly, a phone number the HOA management office had on file and could easily have reached, she called the police, reporting a suspected break-in at a property she herself had just attempted, unsuccessfully, to access using a key she should not have possessed in the first place. I want to tell you about coming home to find 2 patrol cars in my driveway, genuinely startling in the moment before I understood what had actually happened, and the specific, slow-dawning realization, once the responding officers explained the situation, and I confirmed my own identity and ownership, that Priscilla had not simply been confused about a lock change. She had been in possession of a key to my property that I had never authorized, attempting to use it without my knowledge, and had then escalated her own inability to access my cabin into a police report, rather than the simple phone call that would have immediately clarified the entire situation. I want to walk you through the conversation I had with the responding officers once everything was clarified, because one of them, a genuinely sympathetic sergeant, told me something that stuck with me. He explained that false or misleading reports to police, particularly ones stemming from a private party's own improper access attempt, rather than any genuine indication of criminal activity, could, depending on the specific circumstances, carry real legal consequences for the person who filed them, and suggested, if I wanted to pursue it, that I document everything carefully and consider consulting an attorney about both the improper key possession and the police report itself. That's exactly what I decided to do, and what I discovered over the following weeks, both about how Priscilla had originally obtained that unauthorized key, and about a considerably more sophisticated security solution my own background happened to make possible, is the reason this story ends not with a quiet apology, but with Priscilla Vandermeer Ashcombe facing a formal legal complaint, and with my cabin secured behind a lock system that no board president, current or future, would ever again be able to bypass, misuse, or even attempt to duplicate. I want to walk you through how Priscilla had actually obtained a key to my cabin in the first place, because it took some digging to fully understand, and the answer, once I found it, revealed something troubling about how her original spare key policy proposal had already begun operating in practice well before I'd ever formally declined to participate in it. I contacted the HOA management office directly, requesting a full explanation of how a board member had come to possess any key to my property at all, given that I had never provided one under the disputed policy. What emerged, after some back and forth, was that the previous owner of my cabin, who had sold the property to me 6 years earlier, had apparently provided a spare key to the HOA years before that, under an entirely informal, undocumented arrangement that predated Priscilla's formal policy proposal by several years, a key that had simply remained in the management office's possession, never returned, never invalidated, and never disclosed to me at any point during my own purchase or subsequent ownership. I want to sit with that detail for a moment, because it meant that for 6 full years, without my knowledge or consent, a spare key to my own cabin had been sitting in an HOA management office, available, apparently, to whichever board member wanted to use it, a genuinely unsettling discovery that went well beyond the immediate police incident and raised real questions about how many other cabins in the community might have similarly forgotten unauthorized keys floating around in HOA records from previous ownership arrangements nobody had ever properly cleaned up. I want to introduce you to the attorney I contacted once I'd pieced this together, a woman named Adiz Nkemelu Whitfield who specialized in property rights and had handled several cases involving unauthorized entry disputes. Adiz reviewed the full timeline, the original informal key arrangement from the previous owner, Priscilla's own written correspondence establishing her expectation of routine inspection access, my formal written refusal to participate in the updated policy, and finally, the police report itself, and told me within our first meeting that this represented a genuinely serious combination of issues. "Farooq," she said, "you have a private citizen who was in unauthorized possession of a key to your property for years, without your knowledge, attempted to use that key to access your cabin without your permission, and then, when that attempt failed, filed a police report characterizing the situation in a way that placed suspicion on you rather than accurately describing her own improper access attempt. Depending on exactly how she characterized things to the responding officers, that report itself may constitute filing a false or misleading report, separate from the underlying unauthorized key possession and attempted entry, which itself likely constitutes a form of trespass or unlawful entry attempt under our state's specific property statutes." Adiz filed a formal complaint on my behalf, addressing both the HOA's improper, undisclosed retention of an unauthorized key across a change of ownership, and Priscilla's specific attempted use of that key, along with the resulting police report, seeking a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, assurance that no further unauthorized keys existed anywhere in the HOA's records for my property, and a review of exactly how the police report itself had been characterized to determine whether it warranted a formal false reporting complaint as well. I want to walk you through the community meeting that followed, because once word of the situation spread, considerably enhanced in retelling by neighbors who'd witnessed the actual police cars in my driveway, it generated real concern among other cabin owners about whether similar forgotten keys might exist for their own properties as well. Several neighbors, once they understood the scope of what had happened, requested their own formal confirmation from the management office that no unauthorized keys remained on file from previous ownership transfers, a request that, once investigated, revealed that mine was not, in fact, an isolated case, with at least 6 other properties showing similarly outdated, undisclosed spare keys, still sitting in HOA records from ownership changes going back over a decade. I want to tell you about Priscilla's response once this broader pattern became public at that community meeting, because her attempt to characterize the entire situation as a simple misunderstanding fell apart considerably once multiple other property owners realized they too had unknowingly had keys to their own cabins sitting in HOA possession without their consent. A woman near the front, one of the newly identified affected owners, asked directly whether Priscilla had ever personally used any of these other keys, a question that Priscilla, notably, did not answer with a clear denial, offering instead a vague statement about routine community oversight that satisfied almost nobody in that room. The vote that followed authorized an immediate, formal audit of every key the HOA management office held on file, requiring explicit written owner authorization for any key retained going forward, and removing Priscilla from the board given both the original incident and the broader pattern of unauthorized access her policy proposal had apparently already been quietly enabling before it was ever formally implemented community-wide. I want to walk you through the resolution of the police report matter specifically, because it took a bit longer to fully resolve given the involvement of the actual law enforcement agency, rather than just the HOA itself. Once a D's formal complaint reached the department, a review of the original responding officer's report confirmed that Priscilla had, in her initial call, described the situation in a way that suggested genuine concern about a possible break-in at a property she implied she had some official responsibility to monitor, without disclosing that she herself had just attempted an unauthorized entry using a key she had no legitimate current claim to. A characterization the department's review found sufficiently misleading to warrant a formal citation for filing a false police report, a genuinely serious consequence that I understand followed her, at least locally, well beyond just the immediate embarrassment of losing her board position. I want to tell you about the security solution I ended up installing, because it's the part of this story I find myself smiling about even now. My background, which I hadn't mentioned earlier because it hadn't seemed relevant until this exact moment, is in industrial security systems design, a career that gave me both the professional knowledge and, frankly, the personal motivation to install something considerably more sophisticated than a standard rekeyed deadbolt at my cabin. I had a full biometric access system installed, requiring fingerprint verification tied specifically to my own and my immediate family's registered prints, with no physical key or master override of any kind existing anywhere in the system. A setup that meant, quite simply, that no spare key could ever again exist for anyone else to obtain, copy, or misuse, regardless of what informal arrangement some future owner or HOA board member might attempt to establish. I want to tell you about the message I sent to the HOA management office once that system was installed, informing them clearly and formally that no physical key to my property would ever exist again under any circumstances, and that any future emergency access needs would need to be coordinated directly with me or through the local fire department's own separate, properly authorized protocol. A message that, I understand from neighbors who remained active in the community afterward, became something of a template several other cabin owners eventually adopted for their own properties as well, once the broader unauthorized key audit had made clear just how loosely this kind of access had apparently been managed for years before anyone thought to seriously question it. If there's a lesson in this story, I think it's something Adiz said to me during one of our early meetings, reviewing the tangled history of that 6-year-old forgotten key for what felt like the 10th time. She said that unauthorized access, once it becomes normalized within an organization's informal practices, tends to persist quietly for years precisely because nobody thinks to specifically ask who actually holds copies of what, until the exact moment someone changes their locks for an entirely unrelated reason and inadvertently exposes an entire pattern that had been sitting, unexamined, in a filing cabinet the whole time. We exposed it, and it turns out that one unexpectedly changed lock, one sergeant who took a false report seriously enough to suggest I document everything properly, and one biometric security system that no HOA board president, current or future, will ever be able to bypass, were more than enough to make sure Priscilla Vandermeer Ashcombe never again got to treat a key she had no right to as though it were simply hers to use. Thumbnail text. She called cops on her own break-in.